lesson from Brother Louie last week. Anybody remember what it was about?
I don't know. I can't remember.
It was about faithfulness and how faithfulness, keeping on, responding in terms of the gospel, even when it's boring, even when it is painful, even when somebody doesn't like us. If you haven't seen that video. Speaking of things to watch on the internet, if you haven't seen the little blurb that Pastor Luke sent out yesterday on the Roe versus Wade decision, it's really worth reading because it puts it back in the context of the gospel. So if you haven't already, take a good look at that. And today, gentleness, definitely something I need some lessons in. So let's think about gentleness. Let's think about it. I thought, okay, I remember, Sister Katie, how are you? I remember seeing lots of commercials when I was a kid. I don't have TV, so I don't see commercials anymore, but I remember seeing lots of commercials when I was a kid about gentleness, so I was looking for some products that claim to be gentle. And what I came up with, products that claim to be gentle, evidently there's a baby food that claims to be gentle. It's supposed to not hurt their little gums or something. There's some kind of a lawsuit over it, so I don't know what all that's about. I found lots of skincare products that claim to be gentle, shampoos, and my particular favorite, dishwashing soap. In the olden days, we used to put the dishes in the sink, and what, you remember the commercial?
Yeah, and then the lady in the salon.
Madge. Softens hands while you do the dishes.
Yeah.
So what was I to make of this? Well, I've decided lately, it's going to sound weird, but I love soap. I just love the idea of soap. Soap, it's not like I've just recently discovered it, but soap breaks the bonds between the dirt and the body, right? So this stuff, I don't know what to do with the baby food part, but the other stuff is breaking bonds, but doing so gently. Does that not sound just a little bit like our Lord? Hey, Brother Brent, did you have a good Father's Day?
I don't remember.
He's a father every day. He doesn't.
I love Brent's approach to parenting. Matthew had done something, was crying, and I said, "Oh, what happened to Matthew?" And Brent said, "He fell." my kind of thing. He's a very loving father. Okay. So there are things we want to be gentle. Our marketing people want to convince us that the soap is gentle and the baby food is gentle. Okay, but try to envision a gentle quarterback. What do you think? Possible? I'm sure Mr. Mahomes has his gentle moments, but my guess is that's not something we ask of a quarterback. How about a gentle bulldozer? Oxymoron, right? You can't be gentle with a bulldozer. A gentle politician. Still looking for it. I almost put pictures up here, and I thought, no, we're not going there.
But sometimes we rebel. We don't like them when they're not gentle.
Sir?
Sometimes we don't like them when they're tough.
Well, I was saying with politicians, there's the politician is the same as polite, right? So politeness and gentleness can, seem similar, but they're not. So anyway,
Well said. I used to read a column called Miss Manners. Anybody ever heard of Miss Manners? Judith Martin is her actual name. She's got a little caustic over the years, but part of her thing used to be that manners were a way of treating people graciously, and I completely agree. It's not the same thing as either gentleness or kindness, especially at her end. Okay, so there are things we want to be gentle, and there are times we do not wish for gentleness. And by the way, if you haven't sampled Ray's cinnamon rolls, they're back there. Ray and Filter.
I have to say on the bulldozer, only because I know construction and that was my wheelhouse for 10 years. But I actually saw a guy doing a bulldozer over at it was paving a parking lot, and he was gentle, like he was smooth, he was careful, he was really, he was a master at the bulldozer.
Wow.
And I was like, you are good. And he's like, I've been doing it for 30 years. And like, you are good.
I hadn't even thought of that. Well, you'll have to apologize to him on my behalf, but I thought.
But yeah, my boy's doing a bulldozer in the dirt.
I was thinking more of the machine rather than the person, because I know many gentle construction workers. In fact, I'd say the ones that I do know are probably some of the gentlest people that I know both
Well, it
ways.
makes me think of even like NBA like centers that are just massive, 7 feet tall, or like Shaq or something. But to be a really good scorer, at that size, you have to be. They're huge and massive, but gentle, like with finesse. I remember I was always being told by basketball coach like that I would try to do things too aggressive, and you really do have to like light touch, and you'd see like Shaq, just little light touch, he's huge, so it's just funny.
Isn't
But
this
it's
just, I love
strength and
this.
finesse.
That you can see how little I know about bulldozing or about basketball, but isn't this so much the master? Power with gentleness. That's that's what we're going to run. So, okay. Right now as I began to read Wright's chapter, our little prep book, I thought he had some really good things, and I'll quote him a bunch. I did. I almost said it was getting a bit too male for me. He was wanting to put gentleness in a purely reactive kind of way, so I'd like to take it a little farther. But one of the things he starts us out, if patience, gentleness is linked to patience, of course, I agree with that. But do you see me sometimes? I know you do. I'm going to be patient. I'm going to be patient. Louis is annoying me. I'm picking on Louis because he doesn't. Louis is annoying me, but I'm going to be patient. You can see my expression. I'm anything but gentle. Okay, so Wright wants to put it in with patience, rightly so. If patience is the ability to endure hostility and criticism with anger, then gentleness is the ability to endure such things without anger and without aggression. Okay, so I shouldn't be punching somebody in the nose. I should not be yelling at them. Okay, yeah, that's certainly a start, that someone can be gentle. Somebody runs into your car in the parking lot. You're not happy with them. I made quite some years ago, I made a really bad turn and sprayed the car of another lady, and as she's getting out of the car, she's yelling at me and cursing at me, and then something snapped and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I know you'll pay for it, it's no big deal," and she suddenly turned gentle. It was
Was that after she saw your insurance card? I think she became gentle. Like, okay, you have full coverage.
Yeah, exactly. The Christ-like way to respond to conflicts, quarrels, rejection, unfairness. Wait a minute, what? I have to put up with conflicts, quarrels, rejection, unfairness? Wait, this is 21st century America. People are going to reject me and be unfair to me? Heck yeah. With softness, controlling my temper. Okay, if like me, you occasionally find your temper boiling over, I used to be proud of being able to not lash out at somebody. But God can take us so much further, right? God can take us to the point where it really does not unsettle us.
Isn't that like the true sign of Christ displayed this, obviously, to perfection, of gentleness without weakness? I remember who it was said about in the biography that so-and-so was gentle, but you'd be a fool to think they were weak.
Oh, that's right.
Or soft, but I think that's such a key marker of maturity, is recognizing that, in fact, gentleness and underreacting at times, and not having to always stand up for yourself or feel like you have to make a display, is true maturity in a lot of ways. I don't know.
Well said. Yeah, it makes me think of an old '60s song. Ted, perhaps you'll remember this one. The song itself is not good theology, or not theology, but there was a time when I felt like I had to tell my point of view. I was like you. Now, you're not hard to understand. You need someone to take your hand. It's called, have you never been mellow?
A lot of people now
Sir?
said, everybody get together and try to love one another right now.
Oh, well, that's a whole nother.
Sounds very
Are
peaceful.
those lyrics part of that song?
No, that's a different song. We could get to that one too. Controlling my temper, a start, but God can bring me to a point where the thing that used to enrage me doesn't anymore. Now, in my case, it's taken him decades to do that, still working on that, but he really can. Yeah, Katie.
I mean, there's so many proverbs about this. Like, Proverbs 15 just has a couple in it. Like verse 1, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. You know, like that. Yeah, a harsh word, what does it do? It stirs up anger. But a gentle answer turns away wrath. Or even the soothing tongue is a tree of life, but a perverse tongue crushes the spirit. And so just that fruit of what comes out of our mouth, or our behavior, our reaction, is evidence of it bears fruit. Our reaction bears fruit.
Oh, yeah,
So,
absolutely.
gentle answer or a harsh word? How are we going to respond? Or a soothing tongue or a perverse tongue, right? How do we respond?
I don't think it can be that can be underlined enough how important that is to that proverb, and the idea of being gentle. To how just not invincible, but like just the body armor that puts you in life to be able to, because we live in such a reactive world, right? We're so reactive to everything, and everything is like sway like super hard. But to be able to be steady and gentle, which can only come from the anchor of the hope of Christ, right? But for our ability to let things flow past us, to turn away harshness, it's a superpower. It's really, it's so many levels of life where that just comes in beautiful. It's a beautiful tool to be able to just let things flow over you like waves to a rock, because we're on the rock of ages.
Yes.
But man, especially in the church, to just be able to.
If you meet someone that has to some degree mastered that, it's really humbling, because you're just in awe. And I've seen
you can't.
I have seen you more than once say, "Okay, it is what it is. Let's move on." When I'm going, wait, we have to respond, right?
Well, and I think another aspect to that is recognizing God's sovereignty and that He's good. So everything that happens, He will use for our good and for His glory. So recognizing that, and then the other aspect is that our part in it, because I feel like gentleness has to do with how we respond to the storms of life. Like, whoa, we're being buffeted. Like, we want to react, we want to protect ourselves. But when we realize that we're already protected, and like when we're rock of ages, stuff for me, let me hide myself in the, like when we're hidden in Him, then we're safe. Then even if something horrible happens, it's like, well, like not only is God sovereign and He's good, and I'm trusting His goodness and His character, but we've been given the gift of prayer. Like we can appeal to His goodness. We can appeal to Him to intervene in the situation. We can appeal to Him mightily to move that mountain. Like we've been given a mustard seed of faith, and that's all we need for His kingdom. Like that is powerful. And so I feel like it's a twofold. Like He's good, and we can trust that. But we also are to call upon His goodness and see His hand act, and that like we're not powerless. And I feel like when we're not gentle, it's because we feel powerless. Like the woman in the car, she gets out, like she feels helpless. She feels like now what do I do? Until she realizes, oh no, I'm going to be okay, right? Like there's insurance, and you're here, and you're getting out, and you're not just driving by it, And so she just needed to remember, or she needed to gain confidence that she's going to be okay. Well, our confidence is in the Lord, and He protects us, and He blesses us, and He makes us okay. And when we don't feel okay, we can appeal to Him, and He still makes us okay. Like,
oh my goodness, that calls to mind a strange example. The day of John's funeral, my oldest, we'd had the funeral, we'd been to the graveside. I had seen my other two back off to college. They insisted on going back. I'm coming home, obviously all sad, and what am I going to do? And I come home, and on the table, the kitchen table, are all these flowers. Oh my goodness. There were all these flowers that from the funeral and everything. And it just, it just spoke to me of the love that was surrounding me, of the people, and it spoke to me especially of the love of God that was surrounding me. And in that moment, I had that strong awareness that God is protecting, that despite what had happened, God is protecting. Yeah, and to live in that reality. Oh my goodness. Yeah, good Ted.
Jesus did, however, answer his critics and defend himself and showed them the error of their thinking. He did it without cursing them or flying into a rage, but he did it with gentle strength.
Gentleness is not weakness. Yeah, and we're going to hear a quote from Chesterton about that G.K. Chesterton about that very thing. That gentleness doesn't mean wimpiness. When I ask my classes about humility, because we have a little unit on humility, do you want your kids to be humble? Oh yeah. Do you want them to be as humble as possible? No. I want them to have self-esteem. And then we talk about how, well, the self-esteem is a whole other story in my view, but how humility doesn't mean thinking badly of yourself, and gentleness doesn't mean not responding. Gentleness can be very clear and strong.
Not disregard. It's not just disregard. Yeah, because we can mask gentleness in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Well, that person's very gentle, but actually they don't stand up for anything. They stand on nothing.
Right.
And that's not actually gentle.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And I'm afraid we let some things drop. Not you and I personally necessarily, but as a Christian community across the nation, we let some things drop because of doing exactly that.
Well, when Christ had walked into one of the synagogues and they were using it, gambling or basically a market, and he came and turned
He's
over
in there.
Yeah, in a sense, he was gentle because the Son of God can do all things, and he could have cursed everyone at that moment if he wanted.
Oh,
But
yeah.
He was gentle in the sense that he was standing for, hey, this is the house of my Father. I'm not going to disregard this as some of the priests. This is a place of worship, and you're preventing others from worshiping. So in a sense, he was gentle, I would say, on how he handled that.
Oh, and that's something we'll talk about too. Is that gentleness often means that I don't use the power that I would otherwise have. I was upset about some things that happened at General Assembly, and like I said, only partly jokingly, well, maybe lightning will strike them, and I was reminded that my approach, because these are my brothers and sisters in Christ, and my approach to them needs to be gentle.
I was thinking also about the concept of honor, how when Jesus was in the temple, he just even clearing it out, he was still, I don't know, maybe let's not do something, but just the idea of honor, he's not dominating, he's not forcing his will so much. There he was making a statement about, I don't know, I'm not actually going to parents, but just, I guess the idea of honor. If I'm dishonoring somebody, then, my children, for example, if I'm going to dishonor them, if I'm going to, they're not obeying me, I'm going to force them to obey me, right? I can be harsh, and that's, the opposite of gentle. But if I'm going to honor their personhood, honor their decision to make a choice to sin, then I do what God says, not force them, not control, not dominate, not manipulate, not intimidate, not all the fleshly responses that I would appeal to or naturally do. But to actually use God's means of disciplining my children His way, then I'm honoring them, I'm honoring the Lord, and I'm showing gentleness through that strength of discipline. But they're responsive to it, but I haven't forced them, I haven't controlled them, I haven't dominated them. I'm honoring them in that approach. So I'm not, when I think of gentleness, or in the worldly sense, it's oh, I'm caressing my children's cheek. I'm well, no, I'm actually caressing another cheek, in a little harder way.
Well, I think Christ was honoring the Father when he went in and turned the tables.
Right.
He was, and through demonstration, that's the type of honor we should have for the Father. He didn't walk in and say, okay guys, put away your gambling chips, and fold the tables. It's, hey, we're talking about the creator of the world.
Right,
Exactly.
and then with my kids, I see how their hard heart turns to a soft heart because God's doing the work in their heart. he's honoring his word that his means will accomplish a good fruit. But then I'm at the same time able to honor my children and show gentleness through that strength of obedience to the Lord.
And that shows so much in what we see here in your interaction with your children. You know, they're aware of who they are in Christ. And so, to your point, gentleness doesn't necessarily mean, and to your point as well, gentleness doesn't necessarily mean saying nothing. A gentle response can be strong, firm, and clear, but without hostility. I love seeing parents of young kids. You do exactly that. No, you will do what I say. And not dishonoring them in any way. And the kid actually values that.
Hard work can be gentle.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Okay, so what my question for you is, in what situations does our society value gentleness, and in what situations does it oppose gentleness? Because one of Wright's big themes here is our society doesn't value gentleness all that much. Well, it's a, he doesn't use this phrase, but it's almost a dying value. Does our society value gentleness in anything?
I think it's, like we talked about earlier, masked gentleness, a selective gentleness, right? You'll see it right now in our culture that gentle, if it is something that we want to be gentle about, or a people group or whatever it is that we want to be gentle with, but heaven forbid that you step in the wrong area, then all gentleness is out the window. So I think I think it, just like every other fruit of the Spirit, is impossible to exist apart from the Spirit, apart from God's. It's going to be a counterfeit. It's going to be counterfeit gentleness.
Exactly.
Oh, okay, that helps enormously, because I could get it with joy. You know, joy isn't the same thing as happiness, right? And peace isn't the same thing as absence of conflict. But I kind of couldn't pull apart the gentleness one. Like, how is our view of it different from the world? And I have some thoughts about that. But yeah, I mean, does it indeed exist apart from the acknowledgement of the one true God? Because there's a certain element of surrender. The only place I think I can say that I have seen fairly consistent celebration of gentleness in our culture is with mom and a newborn. But even that is now being torn apart in terms of all kinds of quibbling and quabbling over rights and what ought to be. And yeah, I hate to see that destroyed. We devalue gentleness a great deal. You don't get ahead in politics. You don't. I have Christian friends who are entrepreneurs, but when they go to the entrepreneur workshops, gentleness isn't one of the first things that they're taught, right? They're supposed to be in there and showing their product.
I saw that. I worked on power plants as an engineer for 8 years, and I was a woman on a construction site with a bunch of men. But what I noticed was that every other woman on the job site tried to be tough like a man. Like, men, I think, are naturally strong. God's designed you to be strong. But here I saw all these women that were trying to be men and trying to have this persona, have this attitude of, well, I'm going to profane even more than you are, and I'm going to, I'm going to be tougher than you are to gain your respect. But what I found is that they didn't, and that when I had gentle answers, and when I was a woman interacting with men and honored them as men, and they honored me as a woman, that it was way better, and they delighted in me. I delighted to work with them. Like, it was a good situation. But man, I have another woman come in, and I was friends with these women. And I'm like, oh, like,
Oh yeah, and I always,
you don't have to be so prickly. Like,
I always feel like my generation should apologize to your all generations. I mean, ours generation, but because the 70s feminism did some of that.
Oh, it's still here.
That we were. Right. What is gentleness in the world's term? Gentleness isn't even very popular. Years and years ago, before I had any idea who this Christ was, I was about 20, and I remember a pastor who, to this day, I respect enormously, saying something like, as Christians, when we start talking about our rights, we're probably off track. And I was 20 years old and newly married. I'm like, you can't talk about rights. I think Dwayne was right. I think he was absolutely right that surrendering some of our rights. When the world thinks of gentleness, it calls to mind not hurting, being careful not to hurt. Well, it's good to be careful not to hurt in many situations. But if you were here last week, you remember I talked about Ramon, who was the criminal who was going up. You know, the judge was gentle in how he listened to Ramon, but he's done a carjacking with a razor blade. He's got seven felony convictions. He's going to jail, and we would not have wanted him to do anything else at that point.
So is carefulness the counterfeit then to gentleness, or is that? Well, and I only ask because like when I grew up, my mom, be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful, and so then it's like fear-inducing. I don't know, but maybe I don't know,
Yeah.
or maybe that's a totally different topic where it's like, well, no, that has to do with courage. That carefulness, because I lacked courage then to step out into danger, potential danger. But you know, just like climbing the tree that's safe to climb. Climb it because it was climbing the tree.
Safe, or safe.
Safe, okay.
Of course,
I think carefulness and safety, because we've seen that in our culture, like even the whole COVID thing of like being safe and careful was the highest value all of a sudden.
we have safe spaces, and
Right.
let me preach Jordan Peterson. We're having our kids to be safe at every turn, and we're just very, very careful with them, and they may not learn how to take risks.
Well, I think even like the person of Jesus is so beautiful about the fact that he wasn't like Jesus the poet and no one understood from Bethlehem or the dancer or whatever. He was a carpenter and he was gentle, but he would have had callous, gnarly hands. You know, he was a stonemason most likely, so he's this gentle. You see the picture of like you think of Jesus as the St. Francis of Assisi or something, and and I think they've overwimplified Jesus.
Did you say wimplified?
But it's the beautiful paradox of like, there's a paradox in God, and it's part of the mystery, is that he is these perfectly gentle in ways that we can never even fathom, and yet also perfectly, he said, strength and strong, and he's the lion, right? He's in one moment in the Chronicles of Narnia, Lucy can grab his mane and pull him close, and yet he also is a lion.
Yes, yeah. One of the gentlest men I have ever met is Ifechuku Komado. You've heard me mention him before, but you probably don't remember the name. This is the male of the couple whose proposal I got to watch a few weeks ago. Now, Ifechuku is probably 6'7", and you know he's a really big guy, very agile, but I got to watch him kneel down and propose to Shondell, and we're all crying there, and then he gets up and he picks up Shondell and puts her on his shoulders, and it was just so touching, and it was just such a picture.
Well, that's a great picture, gentleness in marriage, and the male-female component of there's just a lot to be said about that.
Oh my goodness, yeah. How long you got? We could do a whole thing on that. So, Christ-centered terms, gentleness, treating with extraordinary care. That's where I want to step beyond what Wright says. It's not just how we react to conflict. It's that for sure, but treating them with extraordinary care. And so if someone with a little baby, when Xander was first born, you know how if you have parented more than one child, you know how you're really, really careful with the first one and a little bit less so with the second one. So with Xander, I was kind of nervous to hold him and am I doing this right? Because he's this little baby. And Bexley we're the same way with, except we're maybe not as over cautious, like Katie was saying, treating with extraordinary care, like when you find a little bird. One of my favorite tender moments with my son John, we were someplace at the bottom's getting ready to go on a little boat ride, and there was a guy called the Bird Man, and you could go and see all these birds, and there's John, 4-year-old John, holding the little bird in his hand and just being so gentle and tender, treating with extraordinary care, restraining power. I expect you to use your power and you don't. Were you ever in trouble and then you didn't get the punishment that you thought you should? I bet I'm the only one that ever had that happen. Lots of times, somebody has had the power to visit either an appropriate punishment or in some cases and what would have been an injustice and has not done that. Okay, I'm restraining the power that I have. And respecting, like Katie was saying, respecting sensitivity, delicacy, or vulnerability. A baby is clearly vulnerable. A person, it's a line to walk. Do you ever struggle with that sometimes in terms of relating to a person who has a particular physical disability and how to approach it with gentleness, but at the same time respect the person they are? A student I had several years ago was a really good example that she's blind, totally blind, and autistic. And man, you didn't grab Sylvia's arm and take her across the street. This is not what you do. But for someone to say, I see you're looking for a trash can, here it is, that would be hugely helpful. Wright says we have to be aware of the person. We have to be aware that we're back to listening. Okay. Now this I had forgotten about. I've forgotten a little bit about Aristotle, but I had forgotten that he talked about gentleness at all. Even among the ancients, gentleness wasn't valued in the same way it is among Christ followers. So Aristotle, he's the Greek that brings in our senses. He's the one that says, hey, we can to some degree trust our senses, and we can do observation. And he has this list of values, and many of them we would affirm. Well, he's got gentleness in there, but gentleness is what he calls the golden mean. We've got on the one hand, I don't know why I put apathy, anger. It should have just said, oh, I see it. Should say excessive anger in the other picture. On the one hand, we've got apathy, I'll just let it go. At the other extreme, we've got anger, it's blowing up. And right in the middle, we have gentleness. Is that how you think of gentleness? It's kind of somewhere between apathy and anger. Hey, Wright takes Aristotle to task on that, I think rightly so. He said, that's kind of a wimpy way to look at gentleness. It's not, because Aristotle is envisioning us being very controlled, like the movie version of a priest in the 50s and 60s who didn't ever seem to get angry, just very even responses. That's gentleness. And, oh, come on, Ari, it's got to have a little bit more character than that. The gentleness that Yahweh in the Old Testament and then Jesus in the New Testament brings in is something very different from what Aristotle is talking about. Okay. Hear this till I'm really tired of it. Oh, the God of the Old Testament is wrathful. And in fact, I am told that some denominations will go so far as to say the God of the Old Testament is a different God. Huh? Where'd you get that? Let's put that in the ridiculousness category. But there are some churches teaching it. But a sister elsewhere just said it to me the other day. The God of the Old Testament seems really, really wrathful. Agreed. God of the Old Testament was wrathful, very different from the God of the New Testament, even though it's the same God. Yes? No?
Heresy. Yeah.
Heresy. Serious problem. No! The God of the Old Testament is indeed very gentle. Some examples. God is like a gentle shepherd. That phrase it stuck out at me because that was the name of the adoption agency through which all three of my kids were placed. You remember Psalm 23, right? So everybody has heard it. Some of you had to memorize it. What do you see in there that says gentleness? Where's my shepherd? I shall not want, and they make me lie down in green pastures, and lead me beside the still waters. See gentleness in there? Come on.
Well, I think the shepherd is a great example because, I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but the shepherd, gentle with its sheep, but also knows when to, wrestle them to the ground and shave off their fur and things, but is also ferocious with the wolf, So that dichotomy once again, a shepherd is by no means weak, but is gentle, a good one.
Yeah, is fearsome with the wolf, and sometimes with the things that are painful for the sheep, that stuff that they put on them, it doesn't feel too good. And I think when you're getting the head out of the bucket, it kind of hurts. The older I get, the more I love the image of us as sheep, because sheep are so stupid. I have no personal experience with sheep, but I have several friends who were sheep farmers, and they told me sheep are really dumb. They sit on railroad tracks, they get their heads stuck in buckets, they walk in water that's too deep for them, and the effort is continually having to yank them out of place or use the crook and yank them out before they get into the situation. And then I can see my Lord in that. Yeah,
That sounds like my children. When they were little, they'd run out in the street. We crossed the street to get to the park, and there's no stop sign there, and so they'd run out in the street. So, I'd use my crook.
And she'd say, "Stop, put on."
Yep, and so there's a blue water spot there on both sides. So I trained them, but I had to still shepherd them, right? So, but I feel like even the parenting aspect comes in again too. Discipline, like we love our children and we discipline them because we love them. And so that aspect, I also think it's the same way in marriage. Like I'm just thinking, like we're reading the Old Testament and how husbands are a protection for their wives. They are a head over their wives. And how in the day that a husband finds out a vow that a wife made, he can cancel it to protect her from making a foolish vow, right? So, like, even wives are foolish and men are there to protect them. Even men can be foolish and the church is there to protect them. You know what I mean? Like I feel like there's authority structure for that protection, just like our shepherd is protecting the sheep, but it's that gentleness, but it's also like we have excommunication in the church because it's a form of love and it's gentle. It's not. It's unto fruitfulness.
I love, and that's so much, in my view, what at least in my limited understanding, what our denomination is structured to put in place. It is that kind of a protective structure. But also, we were talking just before we started here about how if I'm about to make an unwise choice, if you see me dating a non-Christian, just to be clear, done dating, not going there. But if you see me dating a non-Christian, then you have an obligation to come to me and say, Pat, you're on thin ice. And the church protects each other, and that we can depend on each other for that protection. But that also means especially as we take a vow of membership, we need to be willing to receive that counsel and say, you may have some wisdom there. Some other examples from Scripture. A caring father. I love this one. I'd forgotten about this verse. And in the wilderness, where you have seen how the Lord your God carried you, as a man carries his son, all the way that you went until you came to this place. Picking up the son and carrying him. The day that Xanderly got bitten by my dog a couple of years ago. Watching Matthew carry him through the hospital and reassure him. It just was an amazing picture. Hey, Nate.
I know that some of this has probably been discussed before I was here, but just thinking about again our definitions of gentle and how gentle or caring or those are relative terms. God's care, God's gentleness is to lead us beside still waters. Not to just tickle our ears and for our good, these things are laid out. There's quiet pastures that He puts us in. It's not just a continual soft touches and sweet nothings and that sort of thing. It's real key here. Because I think the world's definition of gentleness. I was just thinking, I think it was Stoicism. So I've heard these guys, I don't know, Aristotle, Stoicism, so these guys talking on their podcasts, it sounded so good at me about their Stoicism, what they're trying to attain in Stoicism. And I'm like, that's a lot of fluff, but there's no need to. They don't have anything to go on in ultimate rules and laws. Anyway, so it's just again to encourage us to think.
He has to lead us. Oh, I love that way he said that. Often especially when I get to, I gotta do, he will almost audibly say to me, we need to go over to the nature center. I love to go over to the Martha Lafitte Hudson Nature Center and take a walk. And there I can, all the stuff is, leave a cell phone in the car, and you're going to hear, and hear from him. But he has to kind of yank me out of this stuff to do it. The compassion that he had on children, of course, as a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear him. For he knows our frame, he remembers that we are but dust. You know, it's easy to think about God. It's easy to say God's compassionate, and then when we remember, this is the creator of the universe, being compassionate with you and me as individuals, that is an overawing thought. And then speaking to Elisha, I love ESV, but this is one of the few places I would rather use another translation. You remember when Elijah has fled, and he's like, "Oh, I'm all alone," and what are you doing here, Elisha? And after the wind and earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake, and after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire, the sound of a low whisper, and other translations say a still small voice. And that's where finally Elisha hears God. He's a low whisper.
Well, and I think often people forget about God in the Old Testament is that when he created the heavens and the earth, he was gentle. He was gentle. It was sin that brought ungentleness into the world. But then even after that, we have not been consumed by his wrath. He's always held back. And just as you were mentioning how gentleness is the restraining power, He's always restrained. He's always continued to show his love. Just like a parent, when they discipline, it's not out of wrath. Well, I mean, a good parent, when they discipline, it's totally not out of wrath. But ideally, it's not out of wrath, but it's out of love to protect. And that's what he did with Israel. He protected them. Yes, they had to go in the wilderness for 40 years, but it was through his gentleness, holding back restraining his power of what he really could have done.
Oh, so that he could have done, and that calls to mind what we heard in the message a couple of weeks ago, I think, where God is not just going, okay, you're Christian, go ahead and sin. I mean, he's not just blowing off our sin. He is restraining, giving us time to repent.
It's good because the Lord uses this analogy when Israel says, "You've forgotten us, God. You don't care about us." He says, "How can I have forgotten you? I've nursed you like a mother on my breast." And I think about Amy's right now in this stage of any time that Jamie has to discipline her or turn her back on her in a sense. Amy just feels like the world has collapsed, and that her mother has abandoned her for all times. And it's just this picture of, I'll see Jamie, sometimes they're taking a nap and Jamie will turn her back to Emmy to get over, to say, enough of, you're not listening, whatever it is. And Emmy "Mother, what if, I've been forsaken for all time, and God's like, how can I forget you? I've nursed you. Israel, of course I haven't forgotten the promise, even though it's been this loving discipline that is required and needed. But you think about it, we can't even comprehend how gentle God has been with us. It has to do with his kindness and his goodness. Given the fact of who he is and the power he has and the holiness of God, the glory of God, how kind and gentle and good he has been with us. Long-suffering.
And how often are we like Emmy saying, "You have abandoned me," right?
Right.
Yeah.
I just reiterates what we're never thinking about. But we were reading in 2 Samuel and then 1 Kings this week, and how 2 Samuel, David takes a census, and then God says, "No, I'm going to discipline you for this. Here's 3 punishments," and he's like, "All right, Lord, I'd rather be your hand than the other hand." And then the Lord disciplines them. There's a plague or a pestilence, whatever, a plague, and then they, so many 20,000 people died, and then it's done. But it was like that, like there was sin, David repented, there was discipline, and then it's done, and the Lord was merciful, right? He was kind, and then there's another one like, oh, then after that there's a famine for 3 years, and David, a man after God's own heart, is asking, Lord, where have we gone wrong? You know, and the Lord says, well, this is because of the blood that was shed, and so that needs to be avenged, and you need to repent of that, and da-da-da-da. And so there's more bloodshed because of the discipline that had happened because of sin. But I just feel like we attribute God, like the wrath of God, we attribute it like, well, he's so wrathful. It's like, no, it's because we're so sinful. that it's actually not his wrath, is his love shown through discipline.
One of my favorite
like,
arts
again and again, and he relents. Like when the discipline is done, it's done, and that's fine. But when there's repentance, it's done. Like his kindness leads us to repentance, and so if we're responsive to his kindness, like David was, you see it. Like even 2 chapters, like twice in 1 chapter, it's like again, and then the Lord relents, and and then here's the discipline. But it's purposeful, and it's unto life and purity, and that restoration and fellowship with the Lord, because that was broken because of sin. And so I don't know. I just think how we view God is how we are. We're sinful, so we're wrathful, so we assume he is, but he's actually gentle, and we're not.
Oh, we're so kind to attribute our characteristics to him. One of my favorite R.C. Sproul moments was he quotes people saying something like what you just characterized and said, "What is wrong with you people? Don't you realize how much God is restraining?" Jesus is gentleness. Some of you are old enough, well, a few of you are old enough, but probably I'm the only one who remembers this hymn. Gentle Jesus, meek and mild, look upon a little child. Pity my simplicity, suffer me to come to thee. That was a children's hymn that Wesley wrote. Oh,
You skipped.
I did. There we go. There. Okay, here's my Chester quote. The figure in the Gospels does indeed utter in words of almost heartbreaking beauty his pity for our broken hearts. But they are very far from being the only sorts of words that he utters. Nevertheless, they are almost the only kind of words that the church, in its popular imagery, ever represents him as uttering. The popular imagery is inspired by a perfectly sound popular instinct. The mass of poor are broken, and the mass of the people are poor, and for the mass of mankind, the main thing is to carry the conviction of the incredible compassion of God. So Chesterton wants us to keep in mind that the gentleness was not, the gentle words were not the only thing Jesus said. And I think were he writing today, he might tune that just a little bit, because he's taking the church to task a bit and saying, we're all about, oh, God is loving, and almost setting aside sin at times. But then he goes on through this piece to say, but I can understand that because that's what we need. We desperately need that gentleness. So he lets the church off the hook a little bit, but he wants us to remember that, as you said, Jesus also went into the temple. Okay, where do we behold his gentleness in Scripture? You could probably give me lots of time. One of my favorite passages, come to me all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. How many times have you whipped out that passage or quoted it to somebody or sent it to somebody where they're really weary? Right, really helped me with this point. Israel was to take the yoke of the law. So if we think of Israel had to live under the law and we get to live in the freedom of Christ, well, here's the deal. The law was given to the people after God redeemed them as a way of enabling them to live within the sphere of blessing of redemption. Their society and culture would be filled with integrity, justice, and compassion. So submitting to the yoke of the law was to be a positive, wholesome, and life-giving thing to do. But by the time Jesus was on the scene, the Pharisees and other leaders had made it anything but a frame. Just as people will say to us, oh, you're a Christian, that means you have to live under all these rules. Indeed, there are rules that Christ put before me for my good. They are free. When I don't follow them, I'm like the tree pulling up its roots and trying to think it can be there on its own. Gentleness, the ultimate example is in his crucifixion, right? Forgiving his tormentors, And when they came to the place that is called the skull, they crucified him and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they cast lots to divide his garments. To forgive somebody as they're killing you? Oh my goodness.
There's that, maybe paradox isn't the word, but perfect intersection of strength. I mean, the cross, what Jesus went through and experienced, was the greatest feat of strength that any human could ever display. Yet it was also the greatest act of humiliation on his behalf, and humility, and yes, gentleness and restraint.
My goodness.
So yeah, it's just this, there's no greater picture of godly gentleness than the cross and suffering.
Until I read this chapter, I had never thought, to my shame, about him being there on the cross. And every moment, he could have turned it around. Every moment of agony, he could have called in, come on, angels, here we go. And so, moment by moment, he's denying himself. And caring for others, even as he approaches his own death. Two, my favorites. And there followed him a great multitude of the people and of the women who were mourning and lamenting for him. But turning to them, Jesus said, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. He's going to his death, and he's caring for his followers. And the woman taken in adultery, when Jesus, that comes later. When he's on the cross, when Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said, Woman, behold your son. Then he said to the disciple, Behold your mother. And from that hour, the disciple took her to his own home. He's caring for, making sure his mother gets care.
And there again, in that passage, is how fine the line is between how the way the world would see, like, yes, we look at like Jesus and his humility and peace and sunshine, and yet Jesus on the one hand is, like, the motivation behind the gentleness of God is very different from why God is gentle and why the world desires to be gentle. But here Jesus says, do not weep for me, weep for yourselves. Because you have, in the same reason he wept as he came into the city, a week prior on the donkey, he wept because judgment was coming, severe judgment by God, towards the people of Israel, towards Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple that would be horrendous. So there's that fine line where we're talking about it between what is our motivation for gentleness and God's motivation for gentleness. Yes, to save and to reach down and to pluck us out from sin and death. But yet on the other hand, yes, there is this wrath that will be fully released. I don't know what I guess I'm just talking about.
That was really helpful to me in terms of the weeping over Jerusalem, because I'd always thought of, there's a broken relationship there, and he gets it, but he knows the wrath is coming.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't, it's like seeing your kid about to do something bad.
How I've longed to gather you under my wings.
Yes.
You wouldn't do it. You wouldn't listen. So therefore, wrath is coming. God has been gentle.
I think God is a loving God, a kind God, a just God. But, just like we're discussing, in relation to gentleness, and there is a point where God intercedes, and he doesn't get angry at us, he gets angry at what we do that's bad, right? So I guess that's kind of what I'm thinking, but, I may not be right on that per se, but I think, there is something in the Old Testament about God getting angry and stuff, and it's not that he's angry at us for no reason at all, like, you didn't do the right, you didn't get the right lane, or you were trying to pass somebody or something. No, we're doing something wrong, and he's angry at us, and he's trying to bring us back into his straight path.
He's reacting to our behavior and to our sinful heart, for sure. I'm aware that we're skipping some things, because I'm aware that we stop by time. How and when do we apply the gentleness of Christ. Wright has a couple of suggestions for us as we talk with and form relationships with non-believers. As I'm talking with our Islamic security guard Muhammad, and he's explaining to me how I don't have a clue because he reads the stuff in the original. It's not okay for me to say, well, Muhammad, I have a PhD, for goodness sake, you're being instead, well, let's talk about this, to go to him in a spirit of gentleness. But even if you suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ, the Lord is holy. Always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. And then as we guide each other, brothers, if anyone is caught in a transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself lest you too be tempted. Folk, back to your point, Pastor Luke, about motivation for gentleness. We need to get better at this as a church, not just GlenHaven, but as a church body, about willing to say, hey, Pat, I'm concerned about you. You're going down the wrong road, and because I love you, I would see you do differently. Can I pray with you? From Galatians 6:1.
It's that faithfulness that we have with one another, that we should have with one another.
Yeah,
Because God is
yeah.
faithful to us.
Which brings us back to being vulnerable, right? And of course, as we teach children, yeah, kid.
And blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God, right?
Oh my goodness.
Like as we guide each other, I'm sorry, I'm back on, as we guide each other, sorry, yeah. And
guiding us back to true peace. As we teach children, now I had two little stories for you, but see me later and I can tell you the stories. Anyway, want to close.
Wait, what was the other one? I saw one.
Well, there's one about my dog and one about a kid, but they're too long to go into right now. So I'd love to share those with you. But to conclude, and by the way, if you have a prayer request, feel free to put it on a prayer card. Our gentleness must reflect the gentleness of our Master. It's part of his character, and as we become like him, it becomes a part of our character. This quote from Brennan Manning, who wrote The Cry of the Heart for Intimate Belonging. Our identity rests in God's relentless tenderness for us, revealed in Jesus Christ. Oh, we hear so much about identity, but that's where identity, whoops, come back here. And then Spurgeon, gotta end with Spurgeon, right? Such was his gentleness, that when he might have shaken the earth and rocked the thrones of tyrants, and made every idol god totter from its blood-stained throne, he put forth no such physical power, but still stood with melting heart and tearful eyes, inviting sinners to come to him, using no lash but his love, no battle axe and weapon of war but his grace. Isn't that our Lord? Don't you love the way that Spurgeon puts that? So, gentleness. I'll make myself vulnerable before you all to say, help me be more gentle. That's definitely something I need to work on.
What's the proverb about my kids playing up and listen to this? They keep bringing coals in their head.
Yes, I like that one.
What's the first part?
Unless there's a day to
Be kind to those who hate you, and if you think so, you're peace out of
There you go. Yeah. If you're be kind to those who hate you, and in doing so, you'll be heaping burning coals upon their head.
Oh,
Like the warfare, that gentleness. Like if you're kind, that's
yeah.
that battle's the real battle that's going on, because our battle's not against flesh and blood, but spiritual and so it puts burning coals on their head, which we wouldn't wish upon anybody. However, we do.
It's going to have
we do want to
impact.
quench. We do want to put out the fire of their flesh and light a fire.
It's definitely going to have impact.
With
Okay,
burning
thank you.